we've got Chris C.T. Thomas. Chris began his IT career with the Navy and since has become an expert in IT and communication system to support the global office of CTO in strategic activities related to 5G, OEM, and Dell Technologies. Chris is a certified information systems security professional and an active IEEE member with memberships in the IEEE Communications Society, Technology and Engineering Management Society, and Systems Council. Chris consistently delivers innovation and effective solutions that enable Dell Technologies and its customers to achieve their goals and objectives. We are very glad to have him working with us. I know that he's trying his best to get here to the meeting today. He's got a few conflicts and may be running a little bit late, in which case you'll be left in the good hands of our folks here at Q Secure. Next slide, please. All right, I'm going to go through some of the basics here before I hand it off to our experts. Some of you may be familiar with quantum computing and some not, but our adversaries certainly are. In fact, they're spending tens of billions of dollars on developing quantum technologies, and by most accounts are outpacing the US. Before I get into why that's a problem, there's a few things that you should know about quantum. You're going to get a 1 or 2 minute credit here towards your quantum PhD. First of all, when we talk about quantum, there are 3 main categories of quantum information science, if you will. There's quantum computing, there's quantum communications, and there's quantum sensing. When we talk about the quantum thread, we're talking about that first lane of quantum computing. Now, quantum computing is fundamentally different than classical computing, which relies on traditional bits of information that represent 1 and 0. 1, 0, 1, 0. They process information in a linear fashion. Quantum computers rely on what's called qubits. These are subatomic particles that are often supercooled and programmed in such a way that they represent an information bit of both 1 and 0 or 0 simultaneously. What this allows quantum computers to do is have more processing power, orders of magnitude larger than even the most powerful high-performance computers available today. Now, this is a two-sided coin because there's a lot of really good things that come out of this technology. Any sort of large optimization set is well suited for a quantum computer. Think logistics management, drug development, financial portfolio optimization, weather prediction. However, there's a darker side to this technology, and our adversaries have been very clear about what they want to use this technology for, and that is to break our encryption. It's one of those things that quantum computing is very good at, and unfortunately, it opens up over 20 billion devices to attack. That includes national security secrets, mortgages, financial information, you name it. That encryption that we rely on that safeguards our data can be broken with a quantum computer. Additionally, our adversaries are conducting what's called store now, decrypt later campaigns. These are attack campaigns in which they are collecting encrypted data now while they develop a quantum computer. And once they're able to crack it, they'll be able to crack all of that information that they've harvested. So the thing to take away here is that we can no longer treat this as a nascent threat. This is a here and now threat, and we need to start preparing. Next slide, please. Thankfully, the federal government has taken this threat seriously, as they should. It started back in 2015 when NIST, in collaboration with the NSA, launched their post-quantum cryptography migration project. This was an initiative to find a set of algorithms that can replace what we currently use and will provide quantum resilience for our data. That was launched back in 2015. They've narrowed a pool of about 100 or so different algorithms down to about 4. And stay tuned because they're going to set those and announce those algorithms for standardization next year. There's also a lot of really interesting bipartisan movements that have moved the needle with regard to the quantum threat here in the US. First of all, in 2022, the White House released National Security Memorandum 8, which stated that those may need to start preparing to transition to post-quantum standards. National Security Memorandum 10 followed that up and broadened the scope to the whole of government, mandating that they start preparing for this PQC transition. What does that mean? What is a PQC transition? Well, it said you need to audit your systems, find instances of weak encryption, then come up with a plan for how you're going to replace or fortify those instances of weak encryption for post-quantum resilience. Great. There's the orders. Where's the money? In August 2022, the Endless Frontiers Act became a law, and billions of dollars are now being put behind maturing both semiconductor technologies as well as quantum information science. So they've taken those national security memorandums and ran with it. Lastly, to close out 2022, President Biden signed into law HR 7535, the Quantum Cybersecurity Preparedness Act, which further mandated government organizations to start preparing for this organization and gave this transition and gave further guidance into how to do it. One thing I'd like to draw your attention to on this slide is an overview of investment in quantum computing. So as you can see, the Chinese are far outpacing us in the US as far as government investing. Certainly, there are large players, private players in the US that are invested in quantum, the likes of IBM, Google, and Amazon. But regardless, there's also private investment into quantum in China. So the thing to take away from this slide is that we are behind, but there are ways that we can mitigate this threat such that we can keep pace with what we're seeing across the seas. Additionally, one thing to consider about these federal mandates that are coming out, certainly it's good that we're recognizing this threat and taking measures to prepare for it, but that leaves folks in the government with a lot of confusion and requirements to meet and no real idea of how to prepare for this quantum transition. Certainly, they're going to have many old systems that are using instances of weak encryption, and they're going to be left wondering, how can I possibly afford to upgrade these systems without ripping and replacing everything I already have? We at QSecure have designed a product to help these people meet those changing requirements, regardless of what instance of encryption they want to use, to help them protect those assets today and for the future. Next slide, please. When we consider what an adversary might target within the US public sector, there is no shortage of critical data. Data is constantly moving through a wide variety of environments, from high security intelligence systems and data centers out to operation centers, and then finally all the way out to our warfighters at the tactical edge. So we need to look at solutions that address the data flows across all of these instances and are able to provide a layer of quantum resistance without having to rip and replace all of the systems that our government users are familiar with, and that frankly are not going to be replaced anytime soon. Lastly, you are only as strong as your weakest link. So this is not just a Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Energy issue. This is broadly, we need to extend it to the entire defense industrial base, which is huge, from government contractors to the IT and cloud providers, and then even one step beyond that to our banking and finance industries, to our critical infrastructure partners. All of these components go into making what is considered our national security. And you're only as strong as your weakest link. And any sort of breakage in that chain is going to leave all of our government and all of us vulnerable to attack. Next slide, please. Expanding on that, McKinsey did a very interesting study, which is shown here on the screen, showing what are the most likely targets and who is most susceptible to a quantum attack. Obviously, the public sector with critical information is a huge priority, but also insurance, banking, critical infrastructure. A lot of industries need to start considering this transition now and need to start looking at post-quantum solutions for their own. We cannot wait, and I cannot stress this enough, we cannot wait for NIST and the NSA to tell you exactly what to do and how to implement these algorithms. There are solutions today that you need to start exploring and ways that you need to start exploring and options for you to help start going down the road of post-quantum security and get these solutions in place today so that you can be secure before a quantum computer is able to break our cryptography. So in other words, we need to have the protection before the quantum computer is capable of breaking our encryption, and we can't afford to wait until the large organizations tell us exactly what to do and how to do it. We need to be flexible, have the crypto agility to be able to use whatever algorithms we're directed to use, but we also need to have things in place ahead of time so that when they say that you need to have this, we're well prepared to meet those requirements. Next slide, please. Without getting too into the weeds of our product, I'll just focus on our core tenets here. One of them being crypto agility. Crypto agility, the ability to swap algorithms in and out seamlessly, is going to be a huge advantage in this upcycle to post-quantum cryptography. There are a lot of different configurations, restrictions. Not every customer and end user is going to be able to use the same algorithm in the same way. So how do you deal with that? In addition to that, how do you deal with changing requirements that are going to come out in the future? You need crypto agility, the ability to swap out those algorithms seamlessly without interruption to your data flow. And that is one thing that the QProtect system offers, as well as the ability to bring that crypto agile orchestration to all of our existing systems, which again, are not going to be replaced anytime soon. What the product does is provide an extra layer of quantum resilience that you can control, manage, and deploy to all of your existing systems. And we are just going to provide that extra layer of encryption on top of what you already have to give you peace of mind and know that your data is being securely transmitted at all times throughout its life cycle. To do that, we've partnered with some really awesome people, the likes of Accenture, Amazon, Arrow, Red Hat, and Dell. And all of these folks are committed towards bringing security to all of our data and communications. And especially I've been attentive to this issue of post-quantum. It is coming now. We all know it. And we're here to offer you an easy solution to upgrade to quantum resistance today. Next slide, please. With that, you've heard enough of me talking, so I'm going to hand it over to our experts for a fireside chat. Pete, take it away.
Thanks, Pat. Well done. And we need to get you to say susceptible about 10 times here quick and make sure you're good next time. Hey, Chris, CT, it's great to have you on, man. Is life good in the DC area? Are you on the road? And give me a comm check, brother.
All right. Can you guys see me? Can you hear me?
Got you, and we hear you loud and clear.
I am on the road. I'm actually up, left the Pentagon not too long ago. So appreciate you guys having me and accommodating.
That's great to have you, man. 10 and 2, brother. 10 and 2. Keep your eyes on the road if you're driving.
Oh no, not driving. I stopped.
I'm stationary. It's great to see you again. It's been a while. Last time I saw you was at the Executive Business Center there in Austin, and I'm in San Antonio, and Aaron is in Tucson. So we're catching back up. I like particularly that we've got 3 legs of the Department of Defense covered here with you and your Navy time, Aaron and his Army time, and me in the Air Force. I'm sure our Marines are going to give us grief, and next time we'll have to make room for a Marine on this gig. So first of all, it's great to see you. I've said hi to everybody here at Alamo Ace, which is where I am on the Dell side, working with the autonomous mobile unit. Getting great stuff done. Got some big news I'll save toward the end as we go through this. I think it's worthwhile to ask a few questions of us and make sure we can elaborate on some of the things that Pat covered, and then quick answers and whatever you want to add to it as well. Probably worthwhile to get your thought as a Dell technical strategist and recognize there's probably a brief traditional cryptographic thing that most folks that may or may not be familiar with. So can you explain really briefly the traditional cryptographic methods that we've used?
Sure. So when you think of crypto, right, we use it for encryption, decryption, key management, authentication of digital signatures, hash functions. And we do so without, at this point, right, we do so without even thinking about it, right? For encryption, right, actually taking plain text, right, taking that and moving that to a ciphertext, applying the algorithm, which ties back into why we're moving into a post-quantum era. Looking at your decryption, right, just de-encrypting that same translation back to plain text for use, whether or not there's an application or human level. This is starting to become even more prominent as we start to look at zero trust and our communication mechanisms, right? Having a number of conversations around 5G, where this is going to become prominent. We look at key management, right? The number of keys, the number of devices, the amount of data that we use today, everything is connected, right? If we go back and think about ourselves in high school and junior high, we didn't have cell phones. If you try to take a phone away from one of these kids now, I think you'd have a pretty good fight on your hands. So being able to orchestrate and automate that key distribution and the life cycle of those keys. And then you start looking at authentication mechanisms and the digital signatures, right? False identities, right? You look at your banking, your financial. How do I prove that CT is actually accessing these files and without a shadow of a doubt? And then even hash functions, you start looking at data right protections, right? We've seen compromises across that have hit CNN for whatever case, ransomware. How do I ensure that I haven't been compromised? How do I ensure that file is still intact and the integrity of it hasn't been compromised? So these things are being used. We just often take it for granted. But they're part of our everyday life nowadays.
That's perfect. Yeah, the safety part of what we're really interested in is the speed of the connection and how many devices can I get connected. It's almost as if the encryption piece that we've taken for granted for a while because we knew it was so safe has been there hidden in plain sight. Quite frankly, it may be an Achilles heel. Aaron, this may be worthwhile. We went over a little bit of the difference with Pat while he was talking about how classical computing does its regular, good old-fashioned polynomial math and what a quantum computer is going to do when it steps into some of the non-polynomial, more advanced pieces. As we get into that, might be worthwhile to cover for our audience some of the key differences between classical and a quantum, where we are in the quantum phase between an intermediate scale versus a fault-tolerant type piece. And at the end of that, if you can talk about not only the differences, but why, aside from the great part that a quantum computer, quantum sensing is going to do for mankind and for all of our stuff, why it poses such an existential threat to us when we think about encryption.
Well, there are just a couple easy ways to look at the difference between the classical and the quantum. One is classical uses a bit structure, 0 or 1. All information is encoded in that. However, on a quantum computer, you're using qubits. And you have this extra property called superposition, which allows you to assign a value to a huge number of pieces of information such that they're represented in a way that the computer can make calculations on them without having to resort to just looking at the individual bits themselves. They can take it in mass, and you can do all types of different types of mathematical manipulation on them. For instance, you can apply Fourier transforms, quantum Fourier transforms, in order to understand how different mathematical properties are being used in for instance, a chemical process or a cryptographic process. And that gets a little bit to the traditional classical way in which we do cryptography. We usually either have asymmetric keys or we have a symmetric key. Symmetric key, you use it for both encryption and decryption. And it works fine as long as I can hand you my symmetric key and you can share it, because it's the same between the both of us. But with the internet, of course, it's very difficult for you and Amazon to exchange a key directly. It just didn't scale. So early on in the 90s, we came up with asymmetric encryption, which is the foundation of our public key infrastructure. That particular methodology uses large prime numbers that the multiples of those prime numbers can be exchanged, one as a public key and the other retained as a private key. Now, why does that matter with quantum? Quantum computers are exceptionally good at factoring large prime numbers. And how they do that is through that superposition property.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it's really important. It's like that's what they were made for. And most of that written in Python, they're actually chomping that up and eating it out in a really fast time. You have some obviously we were looking at what Shor's algorithm does and the time frames associated with factoring some of those numbers, and they're down in the seconds.
Yeah, that's right. And the larger number of qubits that they bring online with the error correcting codes, the faster it'll go. In fact, we've even seen where with some ASICs and in-memory computing, they're predicting to be able to break an RSA key of 2048 bits in less than 2 years. And 2 years it sounds like a long time, but a normal classical computer would take billions of years to crack that same key. Now, with classical methods, with these new ASICs, you can break it in 2 years. 2 years still sounds like a long time, but your computer, your operating system, your browsers are all shipped with certificates embedded in them. Those certificates, if you ever go and look at the certificate store in your systems, you'll find that they last up to 35 years or more. And once a quantum computer comes online, they're easily break that certificate chain and then be able to produce counterfeit certificates. But they won't be counterfeit because they'll be real, since they're using the actual prime number factors to create the certificates and sign them. So instead of having your browser trust Google through a certificate chain, when you go to google.com, is it really google.com? Well, certificates allow you to check that. In the future, that won't be the case. So it becomes a very, very interesting challenge for us today, especially with the advent of these new algorithms, new ways of cracking RSA or the asymmetric in cryptography that we currently use.
Yeah, that's that. And I love it. I love it, but I hate it that we're seeing, as we see even noisy intermediate scale quantum computers start to grow and advance, they're kind of a backwards compatibility type world, adding to classical computing or conventional computing capability. That's why we see the ASICs growing across that. So CT, over to you. When we look at this, and I know you guys are looking at this all the time, and as a Dell OEM partner, we're looking at it with you. Give me some examples there of some of those encryption codes that we know of that are out there in the wild being used on a daily basis that would be something that a quantum computer could break pretty quick that we're already seeing even on some of the conventional side.
Well, I mean, Aaron mentioned, right, the primary RSA, right? That's used in every industry that we're using today, right? Your TLS, your connection just to use the internet, right? RSA is a part of that. As you look at, right, Aaron mentioned the digital signatures. Our entire certificate infrastructure is tied to that. So as we start to look at digital fingerprinting and creating identity, right, we have all these initiatives around ICAM, but they're all predicated on the basis that I'm assigning a digital identity that's tied back to a certificate or a token That's all still built on the foundational algorithm of RSA. So now when this problem proliferates, and I mean, you start looking at this from a government or military perspective, we have our crypto there, right? That still has some of these same vulnerabilities. And it's a big concern because you're talking about national security at scale, touching all of those different crypto devices for key assets around the world. You start looking at how we actually do the key exchange for those systems. That's still built on top of RSA as well. So a lot of what we've been looking at here at 8 is even our encryption at rest, right? You look at CFFC solutions, right? We've been working with some of the intelligence community around what can we do different, which kind of fostered some of our relationships and us getting to work together again, Pete. They're interested. It's a big concern because they have to have a plan, and you can't go touch millions of devices overnight. It's just not possible. You can't rebuild all of your private clouds, all your data centers, move and refactor all these applications that are using these tokens, that are using it for the network switches and your firewalls, your VPNs. How do I go touch and change that? I have to come up with a plan today. And that part of the conversation, I've found a lot of customers when I'm having a discussion with them, they think they can prolong it. They think they have forever to do it. Aaron, right, you made the comment. People think 2 years is a lot. But if I told you, if you do something, right, you just go out the door and you rake the grass. And if you do that for 2 years, at the end of it, you'll have $20 million. Doesn't seem as long in context, right? Everything is subjective. So I think people have to start looking at that. Smart cards, right? We have to use that across all the government. Those are predicated with RSA. So it's susceptible across the board. How do we figure out how we start making these changes and implementing some of these recommended policy changes across the field?
That's perfect. I think we're hitting on the RSA piece, and good news is, so we've got Army, Navy, Air Force backgrounds, but we also are looking at the federal place at large, sitting in the seats we currently sit at. We're not talking just RSA. We've DES and TDES still sticking out there, and like Pat briefed earlier, these are long shelf life pieces, and they're not just mission critical to us in our defense side of the house or national security side of the house is one thing. Critical in a lot of cases with your healthcare and your bank records. They sit around a long time, and guess what? They may not be on RSA. You may be
all your financial institutions, right? They're still built on these legacy technologies, and what it becomes is the fear that we're going to have a problem, so nobody ever touches it. Nobody wants to make a change so that we can't go down. But all of these systems that we built in 50s, 60s, or before, this is the technology that they're using. We have to go make these updates. They are susceptible to this problem.
Yeah. And Department of Energy is another great example. There's our infrastructure, like you said, 50s and 60s. And we're dealing with some, and Aaron, I love the way you put this, we're dealing with some end of life systems that we're still using. They may have duct tape on them and they're there. So when we, in partnership with Dell at Q-Secure, we talk about quantum resilient cryptography. And then we add on top of that. So that I think we need to break those two in two separate pieces. And CT, I'll ask you to add in on the back of this. Dell has always got the new next advanced piece, but you're also responsible for things that you've sold that's under a 7-year warranty. So we want to think about both of those. So we think about backwards compatibility when we think about quantum resiliency, about breathing new life into end of life systems, or what we think is end of life, to make sure they're still useful, because we're going to go to war with them. So Aaron, when we ask that and we start looking at quantum resilient cryptography, I think a lot of the folks here listening would love to hear some simple, describe what quantum resilient cryptography is, why it matters. When we get done with that and we talk about the other part of end of life and long time things and what we're going to do to bake those in, CT, you step in after that and add some color.
So I would just like to use an example. We already talked a little bit about public key encryption, public-private keys, that type of thing. So if you think about it, our current cryptography, all it is are two prime numbers multiplied together to get a really big prime number. You pick one of the two multiplicand, and that becomes either your public or your private key. So for example, a simple one, you'll see it everywhere on the internet, 3 times 5 equals 15. You pick one of those multiples, and that becomes your private key, and you send out the public key, and then somebody's got to figure out the other number to make that that triad work, right? Well, that in a classical sense takes millions and billions of years when that prime number is huge, okay? That's really what it does. So it's factorization, it's prime number multiplication. That's the problem. Quantum resilient cryptography uses an entirely different mathematical approach that doesn't rely on factoring. In fact, it uses lattices and learning without errors and a variety of other techniques that are not accessible to a classical computer for them to be able to break, or a quantum computer, because as we mentioned earlier about the strength of the quantum computer is the use of superpositions in order to use the quantum Fourier transform to identify the periodicity within the remainders for the guessing within Shor's algorithm that allow you to determine the multipliers that make that large prime number. So it just is an entirely different approach to deriving the cryptographic keys. And that's what makes it quantum resilient.
That's so CT. I think there's probably part in there where we're talking about end of life systems. And, you know, if you're a knuckle dragger, you're thinking about the advanced processing capability that a quantum resilient piece of cryptography would do. And we're looking at it, especially as a Dell type player, an OEM partner with you here. We've got to be able to process that. So we're working with you guys on that to make sure that these systems don't have too much overhead and can still hold it. So I know you're considering that and thinking about it, and we work closely on it. Anything you want to add on that for what we're doing with you and Dell, and how Dell's trying to make sure this works for us?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things that we've started to look at with a lot of the emerging technologies is how do we ensure that our architecture is modular? How do we make sure that we can still do backwards compatible? I think we made the comment earlier around hybrid crypto systems, right? How can I work in hand in places where it makes sense and apply the appropriate level of encryption or the appropriate technique for the technology, right? What is the risk? And this goes back into that zero trust conversation we had touched on a second ago, right? As I start to look at that, as I'm buying those TPM modules, as I'm looking at my supplier and my supply chains, I need to make sure that I can do that distribution, that I can support both current crypto standards as well as forward-looking, and that I can update those libraries in a dynamic fashion. So that's part of where the relationship has kind of fostered between both of our companies. As we start to move forward, we know that we're one of the major infrastructure providers for the world, right? Great. So if we can help make that easy from a transition standpoint, and that's Dell infrastructure running in your schools, in your hospitals, in your military installations, now we have a mechanism to say it's not as bad of an impact. It won't be as difficult for you to make that transition as you may have thought before. So looking at those standards, and we collaborate with NIST, right? Stand hand in step with them on a lot of research and development activities. So I guess there's more work being done behind the scenes than people may think. And I don't think it's just us, right? We worked with a lot of our manufacturers, Intel, AMD, to make sure that we're able to support this going forward.
Yeah, that nails it. I was trying to, and you hit it wonderfully, is I've got an end of life or an older system, or like Aaron said, I've got the same pseudo random key that's been on my laptop since I bought it, or my phone, or the other pieces associated with it. Does that mean I'm stuck? You're going to have guys on this call and other ones going, what do we do? Is this I need to tear the whole thing down and start from foundation back? Part of the thing that you covered there, when we have long data shelf life or even new data coming in, is we want to give you the resiliency to make sure this works on the new systems and even the ones you currently have. So there's some agility pieces to this that I think are really important. And Aaron, you can probably talk to this as well as anything. When we talk about the quantum resistant cryptography, the agility that we bring in and our partnership with Dell allows too, how does that help us keep ahead of the rapid advancements we see in just natural quantum computing, quantum sensing development, et cetera?
Well, as Pat talked about a little bit earlier, NIST and NSA have been looking at well over 100 algorithms over the last few years to finalize how many we will move forward into this post-quantum resilient world. And they've settled on 4 of them right now. Well, are those going to be the best 4? We don't know. The time is the enemy of all cryptography. Is Shor's algorithm the best algorithm for post-quantum world? We don't know. There could be another one that's developed very soon. So we need the ability within our crypto systems to have intellectual control over what cryptography is being used within the networks for different types of communications. Right now, we don't have that. It's all invisible. It's all done through protocols and negotiations within those protocols for what crypto suite is being used, what protocol itself is being used, in what version, I mean. And the implementation of a new algorithm or protocol takes years and years and years. So adopting post-quantum resilient protocols today gives you more security than you currently have, and at worst gives you the same security that you have. So, in a military operation, what do you try to do is eliminate as much risk as possible, right? If you can do it. Why would you accept the risk, fully knowing that your cryptography can be broken? Anything that you do on a logistics system that's not on CyberNet, guess what? It's using TLS, it's using RSA. All of that stuff can be copied and broken. How many tip fids are out there? I'm sorry if I'm using military lingo for those who aren't familiar with it, but these plans allow us to deploy our forces around the world. They're set in place. They're long duration things, much like a bank account. It doesn't change very often. So if somebody is collecting that information today, they're going to be able to break it at some point. Now, is it still going to be valuable? Probably. So adopting a post-quantum resilient algorithm today prevents the steal now, decrypt later problem that everybody seems to be looking at. So it's not just protecting ourselves against quantum attack in real time. It's protecting our current systems against this permanent theft that is occurring of all of our intellectual property, everything that's going on in the public internets, everything that's going on over space that isn't using symmetric keys. There are just so many advantages to do it. Now, people will say, well, it's not standardized yet. Well, guess what? TLS 1.3 took about 8 years. TLS 1.2 took 5 or 6, and on and on and on. And you can go back through the history of the IETF and all of the RFCs and their development and find that these protocols and algorithms take decades to become standardized. And oh, by the way, if you didn't know, TCP/IP, guess what? That was never a standard. It was just adopted. So there are ways in which you can force the hand of the powers that be that are out there, because they're not all wise. I mean, if you look at some of the scandals in the past between NSA and NIST and the rumors that they put a backdoor into a dual elliptic curve deterministic random bit generator so that they would know the seed of your random number generator that created your cryptographic key so they could break everything. So people don't trust those guys anyway. So, I mean, come on.
Hey, you used to work there, didn't you? So
I did, but I wasn't a crypto math guy.
I think you're hitting on a key point. And this, when we bring this in, and CT, I'd like you to weigh in on it too. Think you talked about how long it takes for that to become a standard. Look at how long it took us to go, hey, DES, the digital encryption signal series that we had. When that broke, it took a long time to put TDES in place. And then it took a long time for everybody to go, RSA is broken. We need to go to elliptic curve and elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman. I think it's important that these things don't just automatically spring up and you go, sorry, your encryption broken. It shows up later on behind the scenes and you recognize the impending need to move quickly. So for us, when we think about agility or resiliency, it's the ability to let you choose your own cryptography so that you now have some new pieces and parts that we haven't had before. So I think that's important for us to know, because we're not going to know when some of those, when a wicked smart math guy somewhere in a dungeon somewhere, that's where I envision them working, dark areas where they're not allowed to go outside and they shove the food under the door. It just gets broken, and it doesn't necessarily break all at once, but we do recognize that the threat is there. So when we think about that, CT, I'd like to get your thoughts on this. because we obviously are looking at the resiliency, the agility, end of life, and the backwards compatibility associated. Obviously, Dell, the large infrastructure capability provider you have, there's the implementation and the development, and they go hand in glove. So what are those things that you think about as a strategic, technical thought leader in the Dell side of the house that you want to add to this when we start adding those different complexities that Aaron brought in for classical and quantum computing developments?
I mean, the biggest piece, right, what Aaron was leading to is continual research and the ability to do that adaptation. How do I ensure that my crypto ecosystem is a modular and open ecosystem? It should matter if I negotiate a system or an approach with one with you, Pete, and another with Aaron. And as long as we agree and we know it works and interoperates within our ecosystem of partners, we're good. We can still communicate. We can still protect ourselves. So waiting for people, right? People waiting for NIST or an agency to give them direction and make a standard. No, we don't have to do that. I mean, look at the buzz we have around AI right now. AI went from being something that was nice. It helped you write, a nice little thank you note or something, or you could research and do, I guess an advanced Google search with ChatGPT. Everybody, every company is interested. Now, if we wait until we have a problem with all of our critical infrastructure, right? We went through all the different places where this may be a potential issue for us. We can't wait until it's a problem. We can't let our financial institutions, take a hit or take a loss to where we're crippled. We can't let our power grids fail. It's not an option. We have to take action. We have to start planning for it today. We have to agree with, let's say, use the 4 that are, presented today. Let's start adopting. Let's make sure the ecosystem allows us forward and backwards compatibility. And then as you start to apply that, now I'm looking at, from a Dell perspective, looking globally, which partners can I work throughout my ecosystem to do this at scale? The coalition of the willing, more or less. And as you said, you don't have to wait for those things to be published. If enough of the ecosystem in the market say, we agree, this is an issue we have to address, we can't sit stagnant on it, we just agree and we march forward. And that will address, and others will be fast followers. I think that's what we're going to see happen here over the next few years, that the coalition of the willing is kind of formalizing, and you're going to see that adoption, and customers, organizations will buy into that ecosystem because at least they know they'll have interoperability. And you have major players in this space. Microsoft's doing a lot in this space. VMware is dedicated to this space. Dell, HP, right? There's a number of people, all the cloud hyperscalers, everybody's involved. So they're not sitting stagnant, right? Industry is trying to get this done. We just have to update our policies and our acquisition techniques within both commercial and government to make this a reality.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on that one. I think sometimes when I look around first adopters inside of some things that are otherwise fairly bureaucratically entrenched, some first adopters are going to do it, even if the barrier to entry was very high, because they want to show that this is available and this is what we do to counter an adversary or to hit the next level of technical pieces. The other parts of the players that come in and go, hey, I'm looking at this, I've watched this, and I don't see a high entry to this. I don't see a barrier for me entering. I don't see a bandwidth hit or a latency. I don't see high overheads. So I go back to fax machine speeds. I think with those folks, when they see that lower barrier to entry and an easier security posture, they're going to be all over it. And to get back to Aaron's point, he used TipFit. So for the logistics side of the house, we're thinking basically beans, butter, and bullets. But that's where professionals work. Professionals, and we think about Department of Defense, we're thinking about, I need to get my logistics in order, because that's where I get the most bang for the buck. I make sure it's in phase, in time, in the Defense Department. Guess what? The rest of the federal government has their own set of logistics, supply chain requirements, management, and the capability to get there. So this mission criticality piece that we're talking about doesn't just apply to the Department of Defense. So when we look at that and we put it, Aaron, in a mindset of the mission critical environment that we said we were going to get to once we laid the foundation, I think there's some important pieces. Obviously, we think about mission critical environment of out to the edge in a denied or degraded or an information limited environment. Other players think about it in the medical side of the house or in the energy. Heck, Department of Energy's got the Tennessee Valley Authority, so the energy grid has a play. Any thoughts on that as we get to mission critical? And then I want to give us about 5 minutes at the end, and I got some great news for you, CT, on things that happened here today at Alamo Ace. But let's spend 3 minutes, if you guys wouldn't mind, on the mission critical pieces that we think quantum resilience and agility are bringing to the table.
Just real quick, we have to be able to implement this in current infrastructure. So we have to be able to tunnel into or tunnel over our current protocols like TLS or SSL, SSH, in order to provide a post-quantum resilient channel and the ability to exchange keys without using the public key infrastructure. So we can do that. Part of the way we do that is we provide essentially like a software-defined network capability. We define a cryptographically defined network capability where we have a software harness that allows us to choose which algorithms we want to apply, the post-quantum algorithms, in real time to any IP and port pair within our network and control the traffic through that particular port. We can do that, and we can add algorithms as necessary to that software harness over time as NIST or somebody else develops those post-quantum algorithms. And it's not just the algorithm, it's the key links within each of those algorithms. So is it Kyber 512? Is it Kyber 256 or bigger? What is it? Well, your infrastructure is going to have a certain limitation on how large of a key size it can actually use because of processing overheads and things like that. So it's not just crypto agility in terms of the algorithms, it's crypto agility in terms of the protocols that are being used and the implementation. How quickly can we bring on new algorithms? How can we deprecate all of the old algorithms that are no longer useful?
Yeah, I love that. Hey, Pat or Meg, go to the next slide. And CT, I know we covered a lot of this, but I want to show you, because I've got a question for you, and I want to give you some time to look at it. I want to give you some data that came from today at 10:18 local Texas time here in San Antonio. When we're talking about the future of what is going to be in the data security world of the future now that we're entering into the quantum age. We're burgeoning. It's like we did on the nuclear age. At 10:18 this morning here, that's Dell's autonomous mobile unit that you see in the upper left-hand corner. On the right-hand corner there is our VP of IT, Bob Woodward, showing a live demo. And the box underneath there at the lower left-hand corner is a Dell Tracewell box that we have our quantum agile orchestrator on. And you see in the right-hand corner, Bob has given, that's an AppSoc kernel, given him a brief. We have all 4 algorithms running simultaneously in the Dell autonomous mobile unit on solar power and Starlink and 5G. And we had less than 1% overhead. And we loaded the page, and you normally get to see Q securing your environment. And it went by so fast, you barely even know that was in a quantum secure layer. So when we think about that and working with Dell, obviously that's a Dell Tracewell unit as an OEM partner. We want to get this in people's hands to get the quantum secure layer capability out to them, the agility they're looking for. That came out this morning. So we're trying to influence what that future of data security and the requirements and the stability and the agility and the resiliency, all the things we laid in, that was this morning, CT. So congratulations to you and the Dell OEM team. We've already been on the call with May, and I got to call Zap Malloy next and tell him, but your efforts and our efforts are paying off here. So last words to you, and then we'll open up for any questions if there's any coming on. But for the future of data security, what are those things in this rapidly advancing quantum age that you think about, other than obviously what you're doing with us, and how you want to implement that with us in a more robust fashion?
So, I mean, one of the biggest pieces, right? So I've been working on our zero trust efforts, right? And the biggest thing that we've seen is the shift from that perimeter-based cybersecurity approach and moving to more of a data-centric right? So going through the states of data, right, in transit and process, right, as well as being stored. How do I do that? Well, crypto has a big piece in that, right? Proving this out with the AMU, right, goes into the edge story, right? How do I start to collect that data? How do I disseminate it? How do I actually utilize it for the operational need within that industry? And this could be tailored to, right, you think through COVID, this could be a mobile hospital type of example here. This kind of more so, what's the art of the possible? As we start to move forward, we kind of to the earlier piece of our conversation, we have to be more dynamic. We have to be nimble. Technology adoptions and trends are going to come faster. They're going to come quick, and we're going to have to be able to pivot kind of to what Aaron mentioned earlier, right? The hybrid scenarios. I have to be, nobody can do a full rip and replace. It's no different than our home, right? You can't remodel it just because, you know, you wake up that day and you don't like that color anymore. You don't go rip everything out and repaint it. You have to take it, you augment it, you figure out what the plan is, and you start going from there to keep everybody happy. In my mind, that analogy still applies with technology as well. How do I keep things? How do I keep nimble? How do I stay lightweight to where I'm as least intrusive as possible? I mean, as a part of this discussion, we did a XR 4000, right, which is a blade chassis. That's just 32 core on each blade. And we're able to provide this with less than 1% overhead. And a standard use case, providing enterprise services within this AMU, right? We're running a private 5G scenario. We have Starlink coming in. So these are things that people are broadly adopting now. They're on the tip of the tongue. Everybody's trying to figure out what they can do with 5G. And we're putting it in practical use right here and demonstrating it at Alamo Ace. So it's not impossible. And I think that's the biggest thing that people have to understand. This isn't impossible. You just have to work with the right partners to help you start on this journey and walk you through on how you execute and deliver.
Yeah, that's awesome, CT. I think the neat part about this that you were mentioning and we're showing right here, not only is this basically an autonomous unit, it's solar powered. We're not plugged into anything with that, and Dell's putting it together. Obviously, it's got a great chassis and mainframe to bring that all through with Starlink and 5G connectivity going across anything in there. I look at it as a military guy. As that's a tactical operations center light, ready to roll in for agility in any type of environment, or a federal emergency management capability that's needed all over the world for all those players. As I'm looking at our LinkedIn questions, we've got guys and gals weighing in here from the Netherlands, from the European Union, from the Indo-Pacific side of the house. They're familiar with what this is, and they're bringing in stuff here that says this is pretty useful. Aaron, I know you saw this and saw some other pieces that I think were important to know. The reason I brought 1018 today to the mind is that this is a critical shift in what's available to you now, and what is, quite frankly, a lightweight capability to bring agility and resiliency to you now. Aaron, any thoughts on that?
No, right now we can deploy anywhere in the world, globally secure post-quantum resilient solution that rides on current infrastructure with zero rep and replace requirements now. We didn't mess with anything with Starlink or 5G, doesn't matter. We're able to provide this security today.
And I love that you've mentioned how rapidly mobile this is, and we've obviously shown the adoption, and CT, you brought up the first adopters. I wouldn't doubt in the back of CT's car, you can see it there in the bottom of the screen. Bob has this Dell Tracewell box. It's basically our orchestrator in a box. It fits in an airline overhead. So CT, please tell me you got one of those Tracewell boxes in the back of the car and you're ready to go, because I'd like to hear Dell's thought on how rapidly you're obviously a first adopter, obviously a technical strategist seeing this coming. Any last words for you, and then we'll see if any more questions come in, and we'll let everybody step.
Yeah, no, we're seeing adoption, obviously, around the communications piece with 5G and satellite comms. I'm seeing this also come up as a part of retail stores. So a number of our retail organizations have asked around PCI compliance, right? How do they ensure that doesn't get compromised? And I've had a couple conversations with a few hospitals that are looking in this. Obviously, most of the IoT sensors aren't necessarily overly robust. So kind of to Aaron's point, how do I do this in a non-intrusive fashion and maybe augment these cheap sensors? Because buying a $3,000 sensor doesn't make sense. You can't buy 20,000 of those. economically is not affordable. But if I can still keep and purchase a cost-effective sensor, augmented security capability, now I have a discussion. I can start to move things forward. So yeah, we're trying to prove this out. We're working through a number of different proof of concepts and activities and seeing how we can work with customers to make it viable and shape that plan.
Yeah, I love it, CT. Thanks. And Aaron, thanks for being on too. By the way, we get a lot of comments here in the LinkedIn questions, and you guys are nailing it. I'm reading things about quantum Fourier transform adoption, Moscow's theorem, but we keep our finger on that pulse. In the last 3 months, we've seen 4 or 5 major changes in quantum error correction as far as control plane depth and how we're getting more qubits tied together for longer periods of time. We're obviously seeing the quantum factoring go from classical to a quantum computer. Reach out to us, obviously reach out to us on QSecure. We're obviously Dell OEM partners. Our emails are up there, and we publish a lot of what we do. Obviously, CT's on IEEE. I've got some IEEE work. We're leaning into the professionals to see how fast this is adopting and moving in this. And we're trying to make sure we bring agility and resiliency to you, no matter what you are, because everybody's got mission critical environments. If it's not in the Defense Department, it'll be in commerce or labor or state or energy. And our commercial sector has those same things. So by all means, reach out to us. CT, thanks so much for taking time. I hope we didn't throw you into traffic in the DC area. And Aaron and Pat, Meg, crowd, thanks for running with us. And with this, we'll wrap up here and conclude. Thanks for your time today, everybody. Bye, CT.
All right. Appreciate it. Good seeing you again.